So there's a new poll out by Mainstreet Research, and it discovered that most Canadians approve of Donald Trump's economic plan versus Trudeau's. So the Financial Times reports that, quote, 53% of Canadians approve of what Trump is doing versus 43% of Canadians who approve of what Trudeau is doing. Trudeau's disapproval rating on economic policy is 41%, while Trump's disapproval is just 22%. Now, before we kind of dissect that, you might be thinking, whoa, are Canadians more conservative? Are they more receptive to authoritarian leaders? No, I think it's actually quite obvious when you consider both economies of both countries. So Canada's economy, as pretty much everyone knows, is very much dependent on high prices of high natural resources like oil. And since that price is pretty low, a lot of oil producing countries around the world, like Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, are all feeling the pain right now. In contrast to the United States, whose economy is much, much bigger and much, much more diverse. So, for example, there's a huge financial sector in America, there's a huge tech sector in the West Coast, a massive agricultural industry in the heartland America, and even a sizable oil industry in the Texas area. So naturally, if there's any sort of oil crash, Canada is going to be more negatively affected than the United States. And it doesn't really matter if Canada has a conservative prime minister or a liberal prime minister or even a socialist prime minister. If that oil price is low, a lot of people are going to hate that person because most people, they don't really view the economy and politics from the perspective of a political scientist. They look at it as, hey, my life sucks, this guy's in power, I hate that guy. And especially since you have Trump across the border with all this bravado and all this bringing back jobs policy, since he's something of a strongman, I think naturally a lot of people are going to find that message very attractive, whether they're Canadian or American. I think another reason why he polled quite well here with respect to the economy is because Trump has a pretty strong ability to frame the narrative of a lot of things. And since most Canadians probably followed the presidential campaign even more closely than a lot of Americans, we were all very much exposed to this bringing back jobs rhetoric, which was a huge part of that campaign among Bernie, even Hillary, and especially Trump. And we were all also exposed to some of the deals that were made in recent months. One was Carrier. Trump basically told the media, I made a better deal for Carrier. Believe me, they're staying here. They ain't going to Mexico. And even though all Trump really did was bribe them to stay in the form of tax breaks and deregulatory measures, most Canadians, in light of the scarce job market, in light of a very fragile workforce, in light of low oil prices, of course, they saw that as a symbol of strength. They saw that as a leader who gets things done. And since everywhere around the world, people are fearing for their stability, anytime a leader comes out and says, oh, I'm keeping jobs here, people generally like that. Even though many economists have argued Trump's deal with Carrier set a pretty dangerous precedent because basically more corporations will probably want favors from President Trump, most people aren't going to bother to look at the nuance of that and dig deeper. They hear a leader bringing jobs to its people and being strong. And since a lot of people don't understand that it's very hard to bring jobs back to an economy that's dependent on, greater market forces like the price of oil, which the Canadian government has very little influence over, it's easy for them to feel a lot of dismay towards Justin. Now, this poll was much more comprehensive than simply asking people what their opinions were on both leaders' economic platform. It also asked questions about both leaders' character traits. 63% of people polled found Trudeau more inspirational to Trump, who was at 23%. 57% found Trudeau more intelligent, whereas they found Trump at 27%. Honest, they polled Trudeau at 58% versus Trump at only 16%. So in light of those areas, Canadians polled Trudeau much higher. However, interestingly, one area where Trump polled higher was that on national security. According to the Financial Post, quote, Canadians surveyed by Mainstreet gave Trump 51% approval and 39% disapproval on the U.S. president's approach to national security. Trudeau, by contrast, had the approval of just 39% of Canadians and the disapproval of 37%. As you know, there's a lot of, I guess, anti-Muslim skepticism around the world, and that doesn't exist because most people are racist and most people hate Arabs and all that. Of course not. But I think amid several of the terrorist attacks which have occurred around the world in Turkey, France, the US, etc., there are a lot of people who are absolutely opposed to any sort of Syrian refugee immigration taking place in the US. And even though Canada has taken in, I think, roughly 50,000 or so, there are a lot of people in this country that say we should take in absolutely zero Syrian refugees. And a lot of this, even though I disagree with that opinion, there are some people in this country who have very much been affected by this spike in far right-wing nationalism that's taken place over the world. And this was especially so in Quebec. 6 people or so were murdered by this ultra right-wing individual who had very strong opinions relating to anti-Muslim ideas and whatnot. And since the president has had some pretty controversial opinions on that throughout the campaign trail and even in his recent ban, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that even people in Canada are affected by that kind of rhetoric. And in this case, someone, I guess, arguably acted on that rhetoric. However, I think the real answer can be discovered by just examining history real quick. Looking throughout the world, during times of economic strife and inequality, that's when leaders have been able to sell the message of divisiveness versus inclusiveness. And that's happened on countless occasions throughout history. And there's a great quote that anytime you see someone kicking on another human being that's below the economic ladder, chances are that there's somebody above them kicking them too. So obviously these issues that we discuss on this channel are much bigger and much more complicated than many believe them to be. And everything I put on this channel is just a perspective, and I hope to get everyone's opinions on those things. And I obviously hope to get your opinions on the content discussed in this video as well. But as always, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks a lot.